Konnichiwa minasan, and welcome to the class in the second lecture series on Introduction to Japanese Language and Culture. This class is a continuation of the previous class where we were doing hormone expressions, expressions you will use when you go visit somebody. So, last time we finished at where Tanaka-san enters the house and he says gomen kudasai, and then the host says ohairi kudasai, and they go in, and he is admiring the house, and all kinds of things are happening over there. So, a few expressions were used at that time. Now, today we will see what all expressions are to be used when Tanaka-san is in the house and he is interacting with the host, and when he leaves the house or just before leaving, the host and the guest, what all do they say. So, let us see what we have in our kaiwa today. So, now once you are comfortable in the house and you have gone in and you are sitting there and interacting with the host and some time has elapsed, what will the host say to you? Obviously, the host is going to offer you some tea or some coffee. So, what is the expression that the host uses when he is offering you? You have done this once earlier in a very informal manner. So, now let us see what is the formal way of asking.
皆さん、紅茶はいかがですか？
どうもいただきます。
私は和菓子を用意してます。食べてみませんか？
すみませんですが、和菓子は何ですか？
日本のお菓子です。甘くて美味しいですよ。召し上がってください。
いただきます。とても美味しいです。So, you just heard the kaiwa between Tanaka-san and Mira-san. 二人は今うちの中にいます。そしていろんな話をしています。田中さんはミラさんに紅茶のことを聞きます。どうやって聞いたか、それを見てください。じゃあね、田中さんはミラさん、紅茶はいかがですか？ How about 紅茶。紅茶 is our tea, and ocha, as you already know, is the green tea. 紅茶はいかがですか？ Now, the informal way that you have done is 紅茶はどうですか？ Isn't it? How about 紅茶? You can use どう with anybody, but don't use it with your seniors or in formal situations. Always いかが is preferred. どうもいただきます。So, she very politely says, yes, I will have. Tanaka says, 私は和菓子を用意しています。食べてみませんか？和菓子 is Japanese sweets. Yoi is I have prepared and kept for you. So, 私は和菓子を用意しています。食べてみませんか？ She is asking very politely, won't you eat? Won't you try and see? She could have also said, 食べてみてください. Again, this is not very formal. So, once a guest comes to your house, you need to be a little formal, and I think we do this in English and even in our mother tongues as well. So, 食べてみてください is directly telling Mira-san that please eat and see. Over here, she is saying 食べてみませんか? Won't you eat and see, which is considered more polite. Now, this is a long ano. What is the difference? You have done ano as in kono sono ano, kono sono and ano. You have done this. This means that over there. but here this is a long sound, ano. So when you are not very certain, when you are hesitant, when you do not know what to say or how to say, then this is one way you will try to sort of get some time and think in your mind as to how to ask or do. So, sumimasen desu ga, this is an expression we have done n number of times now. I am sorry, but, excuse me, but. Wagashi wa nan desu ka? What is wagashi? So, informally she could have said wagashi te. Wagashi te nan desu ka? Wagashi toいう言葉の意味は何ですか? This also could have been used. Over here, she is as it is very hesitant, slightly shy about asking, sumimasen desu ga wagashi wa nan desu ka? And obviously, when you are asking something directly, then you are a little soft in your address. Nihon no okashi desu. So she says immediately it's Nihon no okashi, and okashi is snacks or sweets. So Nihon no okashi desu. Amakute oishii desu yo. So from yo over here, you can easily understand that Mira is younger than Tanaka, or they are of the same age, they are friends, or they are working together. Basically, not a very formal situation. So, amakute oishii desu. Amai plus oishii with kute is equal to and. Now, meshiagatte kudasai. You have also done meshiagaru. Meshiagaru is polite for taberu. So, meshiagatte kudasai. Please eat. And Mira says before eating, itadakimasu. That is the expression to be used. Join your hands, fold your hands, and pray to Almighty for having given you the food, whatever is in front of you. So, before eating, always thank Almighty for what is there. Itadakimasu. Totemo oishii desu. Totemo is what we will do. You have done it also, but we will do it in a different way today. So, let us see what is there in the script. You have nani, you have miru, you have nihon, I am sure, amai. So, amai and nani very, very quickly. I did it last time also. So, nani for you, amai like this. Then miru and then meshiagaru. Meshiagaru. How is it made? Agemasu you have done ue. So, ue is over here and meshi is like this. So, meshiagaru. Join these two and you make please eat and see. So, I am sure the kaiwa is very clear. A few expressions are there. So, we will try to do them right away. Now,
1時間後帰る前にミラはいろいろな挨拶を使いました。ああ、もうそろそろ失礼します。
あら、もうちょっとゆっくりしてください。
ありがとうございます。ゆっくりしたいけど、たくさん仕事があります。それに先生に相談したいから。
あ、そうですか。じゃあ、何も言いません。頑張ってね。
今日はどうもごちそうさまでした。
じゃあ、またいらしてね。気をつけてください。
失礼します。
So, you just heard the kaiwa between Tanaka-san and Mira-san. They have been talking for a while and they have had tea, okashi, everything. Now, Mira has to go back. She has to return. So, what are the expressions that they are going to use? Well, mo sorosoro shitsurei shimasu. So, mo sorosoro, sorosoro shitsurei shimasu means that I have to start preparing to go home. So, a very typical phrase where in your mind you start working that okay, now I have to somehow move towards going home, somehow stop the conversation and start moving for home. Mo sorosoro, very soon. Shitsurei shimasu, I have to do it, to do. From now onwards. Ara, so desu ka? Is that so? Mou chotto yukkuri shite kudasai. This is again telling someone, as you would say in English, oh, why don't you stay on for a little while longer? So, mou chotto, a little while longer, yukkuri. Let's sit for a little while longer. Yukkuri itself means slowly. Shite kudasai. Let's spend some more time. Arigatou gozaimasu. So, obviously, when someone invites you to stay for a longer time, you feel very happy that the person doesn't want you to leave immediately. That's a proper way to sort of interact at that time. So, Mira says, Arigatou gozaimasu. Yukkuri shitai kedo, I also want to relax a little. Shitai kedo, I also want to relax a little, but takusan shigoto ga arimasu. I have a lot of work to do. Sore ni, and also sensei to sodan shitai kara, and she leaves it incomplete. This is the reason she wants to go. Kara over here is not from, it is because. Giving reason for what is going to happen now. So, sore ni and also sensei to sodan. Sodan shitai is I have to talk to sensei. I have a meeting with him. I have to interact and see what all suggestions he has to make. Sodan shitai kara. Because I have to do sodan with him, then I have to rush. So desu ka? Ja nani mo iimasen. I will not say anything. Gambatte ne. So, because Mira is going to be working with sensei, so well, gambatte ne, work hard. So, now Mira is moving out and she says, Kyou wa doumo gochisou sama deshita. Kyou wa doumo, thank you very much. And gochisou sama is, we have done this expression earlier also with itadakimasu in one of your lessons. So, it means thank you very much for the lovely food that you gave me. Basically, it is thanking the Almighty One, thanking Him for the food and also conveying your thanks to the host, the person who has made. So, like itadakimasu, you join your hands and just bow a little. Gochisou sama, thank you very much for the lovely food. Ja mata irashite ne. And Mira, when she is leaving, Tanaka-san says, Ja mata irashite ne, come again. And parting phrase or expression is ki o tsukete kudasai. Ki is take care of yourself, be careful, like in English, take care. So, in a similar manner, ki o tsukete kudasai. Shitsurei shimasu, and both will say sayonara. So, lot of expressions here today for you, and we will do the little grammar that we have here and see sentences and try to understand. So, you have one kanji over here, it is a simple kanji, kyo. Then sensei, of course, you know, and there is shitsurei. So, you can see over here this and like this, plus ne is here and then shitsurei. Jikan is there, ichiji and kan. You have done kan also earlier. So, now in the conversation we had a word ikaga. What does it mean? It means how about. It is an adverb. So, Kocha wa ikaga desu ka? As you had in your passage, you already know it's polite for do. How about tea or coffee? Would you like to have tea or coffee? Now, this is not the exact translation, but that's what is said in English. How about tea? Would you like to have some tea? Shigoto wa ikaga desu ka? How are you finding your job? Do desu ka? Shigoto wa do desu ka? Then in place of shigoto, in place of this noun, you can use anything. Nihon wa ikaga desu ka? How are you finding Japan? Or what can you say about Japan? What about Japan? Nihon ryori wa ikaga desu ka? How about Nihon ryori? Or how are you finding Nihon ryori? Meaning whether you are liking it or whether you are not liking it. Then, America no atarashi eiga wa dou desu ka? How about going for the film tonight? America no atarashi eiga wa ikaga desu ka? How about the new American film? Or how about going for the film? Both meanings are there over here. Then, Nihon no atarashi anime series wa ikaga desu ka? How have you found or how do you find the new anime series of Japan? Ikaga desu ka? So, meaning changes with the sentence, with the situation, but basically it means how about. What do you think about? How do you find the noun? Now, there was a word totemo in our conversation, and we have done totemo earlier and used it with adjectives, na adjectives and I adjectives. So, let us just quickly revise. It is an adverb of degree which shows degree of the adjective. Now, One-san wa totemo kirei desu. So, she is very, very beautiful, exceptionally beautiful. Then, Furansu go wa totemo muzukashii desu. It is difficult. So, there is a negative meaning over here. Totemo muzukashii desu. So, instead of Furansu go, we can have kono mondai wa totemo muzukashii desu. Sugaku no mondai wa totemo muzukashii desu. Sugaku no kono mondai wa totemo muzukashii desu. Nihongo wa totemo muzukashii desu. Or kanji wa totemo muzukashii desu. Now, totemo can also be used. Totemo. A double sound over here, but used only while speaking during conversation. You cannot use this when you are writing. At the time of writing, only totemo is to be used. Shiken wa totemo kantan desu. Na adjective. So far we were doing I adjective. Over here this is na adjective again. Kirei ends in I, but it is a na adjective. It is an exception. Kino mita eiga wa totemo omoshirokata desu. So, in past as well, it was very, very interesting because of this time expression kino. Kino mita eiga. The eiga that we saw yesterday is very or exceptionally, it was interesting. Then, shiken wa totemo muzukashikatta desu. So, if your test is very difficult, obviously your expression is also going to be like that. So, totemo muzukashikatta desu. By using this double sound, you are emphasizing on this. Now, this is just a quick revision over here with I adjectives, how to make it. So, omoshiroi, remove the E from here, and in negative it is omoshiroku nai. Then if you want to make past positive, then omoshiro, again remove the I and put katta. and then past negative, it is omoshiroku nakatta. Ku is coming from here, kunai. So, again over here, for this you will remove the I. Remember this, you have to make it in this manner for all. Yasui, takai, nagai, any of these. So, you will have to remove this all the time and then make these forms. Now, one important thing over here is that the this part does not change. The tense is coming from here. Please remember this remains as is. Omoshiro-katta desu, not omoshiro-katta deshita. That is incorrect. Now, this part you had done earlier with totemo. Now, we will learn another usage of totemo. It is used with a negative verb and has a slightly negative meaning. And what does it mean? It means that the activity is absolutely impossible, cannot be done, or I cannot do it. So, look at the examples over here. The verb is always going to be in negative, nai form or arimasen or masen form for that matter. Kanji wa muzukashii node totemo yomenai desu. Yomemasen. Totemo yomenai desu. It's very difficult, so I don't think I'll be able to read it. I cannot read it. Then, kono shigoto wa totemo dekimasen. Dekimasen is cannot do. So, you will see again it is in the negative. Kono shigoto wa totemo dekimasen. Now, you have shigoto over here, and it's a good kanji to know because it does come in your N4. So, shi and goto. This is incidentally koto also, which we are going to do later. It is not very proportionate here, but well, like this and then turn it like this. Shi goto. Now, 1時間で料理がとても作れません. I cannot make ryori in 1 hour. It is practically impossible for me. この仕事は1時間でとてもできません. この仕事. So, some XYZ 仕事, some work. 1時間でとてもできない. I cannot do it. It is impossible. A very difficult task to perform. So, this is your new way. You can use totemo where the meaning is in the negative by using totemo with a negative verb. You can make some more sentences on your own using different verbs and try to see whether you are able to use it correctly or not. Now, there was another word, soreni, and soreni means more than or beyond what the speaker has said. It puts more emphasis on what is actually going to follow soreni. Also, it is important to know that the speaker wants to tell his listener that what I am going to say now, it is very important for me. So, let us see from the examples. Kohi wa mazukatta. Mazui is the adjective. Mazui. Kohi wa mazukatta. It was not good, not tasty. Soreni, and above that, takakatta desu yo. It was very expensive. So, it was not even tasty and I had to pay lot of money for it. So, this is the important part that the speaker wants to say. Sore ni. Above what I have just now said, beyond what I have said just now in the previous sentence. Basically, sore ni joins two sentences meaning and, but the feeling behind what you are saying is very, very different. So, party wa tsumaranakatta, it was not very interesting, it was in fact very useless. So, sore ni gohan mo oishiku nakatta. So, when you go to a party to enjoy, if the party is not good, you at least feel happy that the food was good. But over here, party wa tsumaranakatta, it was not interesting, it was useless. Sore ni, and above that, gohan mo oishiku nakatta, it was not tasty. Now, there is a kanji over here, takai, takai. And remember one thing, generally this spelling comes kohi. So, it is a long sound here and here as well. Please remember kohi in katakana. Kyonen, Yoroppa to America, sore ni Australia ni mo ryoko shimashita. So, kyonen, last year I went to Europe and America, and above that I also went to Australia. Now, there is ni mo over here. Ni is for going over there and mo is also. Australia ni mo ikimashita or ryoko shimashita. Ryoko is a trip, a holiday, vacation. これはとても美味しいです。それにそんなに高くないです。This is very, very tasty, and above that, and also it's not very expensive. そんなに means not that much. So, I will be doing そんなに sometime later with you also. At the moment, you can just understand it as not that much. It isn't that expensive. So, それに as and. Whatever is coming here is very, very important. This is what I feel as the speaker, the most important thing in my statement, which I want the listener to know. So, there is something else also over here in this only. So, これはとても美味しいです。それに値段もいいです。The price is also not that much. You go to a restaurant, you have something very tasty, and if it's not that expensive, then you feel very good about it. Now, you have more examples. ミラは英語とフランス語が話せます。She can speak. それにドイツ語もできます。And above that, she can also speak in German. Mo is also. Then, ミラは英語とフランス語が話せます。そして彼女は韓国語もできます。そして also means and. You have done joining sentence 1 with sentence 2 where the same thought is getting carried. Now, it is just a casual and, whereas それに is in the speaker's mind very, very important. Now, you can see from here, チーズサンドイッチとコーラお願いします。チーズサンドイッチと and コーラお願いします。Please give it to me. チーズサンドイッチ、それにコーラお願いします。Means you give me cheese sandwich and also with that give me Coca-Cola. So, both are and, but meaning is different. So, from the examples you can see that それに and そして both are joining particles and are also similar in meaning. Both mean and. There is と also, and と also joins nouns with nouns and means and, but you can see very clearly from the examples that the nuance is very, very different. そして is used to continue what the person is saying, to carry the thought forward by joining the sentence, and adding some more information in a very general manner. But sore ni on the other hand, though it adds information, it is very clear that whatever comes after sore ni is the most important thing in the speaker's mind. In his opinion, it is very, very important, and that is exactly what he wants to convey to the listener. For example, with soshite, you can have watashi wa Mumbai e ikimashita, soshite sensei ni aimashita. これはとても美味しいです。それにそんなに高くないです。Now we have そして which is and so して which is given over here by doing like this. Very different meanings, but pronunciation is quite similar. So let us see how it is used. そして of course you all know. そうして私はやっとできました。そうして in this manner. I did it like this and thus finally was able to do it. For example, you were trying to solve something, some problem, or you were trying to make something. So when I did it in a certain manner, then I was able to complete it. そうしてin this manner. そうして直しました。When I followed the manner prescribed, then I could repair it. 直す to repair. どうやって直しましたか? How did you repair it or correct it? こうして or そうして直しました。Now, そして行きましょう。So there is some hanashi going on, there is some talk going on. So, well, it's over. じゃあそして行きましょう。もう遅いから行きましょう。ムンバイへ行きました。そして友達に会いました。So, そして is just and you're just giving information joining two sentences. And そうして means done in a particular manner or followed a particular method. Now there was another expression in your last lesson, and we also studied how shitsure is going to be used in different situations and what is the meaning. So we had shitsure desu ga. When do you use it? Well, when two people are talking and you want to say something, then you say shitsure desu ga or sumimasen, I am sorry, I want to say something. Then there was another thing we did last time, which was shitsure na koto. Koto means a thing, something, but not physical thing. We have done it earlier. So shitsure na koto, something that has happened which should not have happened, which is something very, very impolite, something which is not to be forgiven. Shitsure na koto. So when you talk rudely to your seniors, or when you say something rude which you are not supposed to say, shitsure na koto o yutte shimaimashita. I landed up saying something which I should not have said. Shitsure na koto. So some act which was not good or which was improper. And shitsure desu ga is excuse me. Now we did nanika in our previous lesson, which means something. So now if we add another word to this question word, interrogative word, nani, we will get a pronoun which means nothing. And what is it? Nani plus mo, meaning nothing. We have done nani o nomimasu ka? Watashi wa kocha o nomimasu. Nani ka nomimasu ka? Will you have something? Nani ka. And nani o nomimasu ka? What will you have over here? Have. And will you have something? So, this is more direct and this is polite. The answer in negative, that I will not have anything, could be the same for both. Nani mo nomimasen. Nani o nomimasu ka? Kocha o nomimasu. Positive. Negative, nani mo nomimasen. Nani ka nomimasu ka? Informal, to be used with friends, not to seniors. Nani mo nomimasen. Answer will be the same, nothing. If you don't want to have anything. If you want to have something, well, you can say kocha o nomimasu, kohi o nomimasu, or whatever you want to have. Now, again we have this nani over here. Please see very clearly. And then we have nomimasu. 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 No more. We will do these in a later chapter in detail. There are many more. So, for the time being, nani mo means nothing. Then, after you have had your tea and you have been talking for a while, you want to go home. So, soro soro ikimashou. So, what are the phrases that you can use? Soro soro kairimashou. So, let us now get up and move for home. Soro soro, very soon kairimashou. And the kanji over here for kairimasu is this. Once again, kairimasu. Then we have soro soro kairimasu, direct. Here, if you have 2-3 people with you, then you are talking amongst yourselves and saying soro soro kairimashou. We should be getting up now. If you are alone, soro soro kairimasu. You tell your host that I think I should be moving now. Soro soro kairitai to omoimasu. I think I want to get up and start moving for home now. So, different ways, different situations you can use depending on where you are and whom you are talking to. And this is the kanji for omoimasu, where this is kokoro, meaning heart. This is omo. So, now after your visit, when you have decided that you want to now start moving out, so the host is obviously going to say something to you and you will say something to the host again before actually leaving the house. So, what does the host say? Well, the host again uses irashai, but over here it does not mean welcome. So, what does the host say? We did this last time. So, waza irashite itadaite arigatou gozaimasu. Specially you came for me, arigatou gozaimasu, and I received the pleasure, honor of you coming to my place. Itadakimashita, arigatou gozaimashita. So, the phrase is waza, specially for me. Waza irashite itadaite arigatou gozaimasu, before the person is leaving, the guest is leaving. Or it could be very sweet and would like to invite again and say mata irashite kudasai, come again please, where mata is again. Irashite kudasai, please come again. Mata asobi ni irashite kudasai. Mata again, asobi is for interaction, please come to my house. It does not mean play over here, it is relaxation and interaction. Now, this is for the host to say, and this is what the guest is going to say. Bow again and thank the host and say ojama shimashita, shitsure shimasu, I will take your leave. A better phrase is also there, which is used a lot of times when you are parting. So, what is the phrase? Let us see. Kiyo tsukete kudasai. Please take care, as we say in English, take care. So, please take care of yourself. Kiyo tsukete kudasai. Both can say this, or just the host can say this as the guest is leaving house. Now, there is a kotowaza that I want to do with you, and it is regarding tatami. What is tatami? You can see the pictures over here. These are jute mats, the chatais that we have in India, which we used in olden times. Now, of course, we do not use chatais anymore. We have proper flooring. So, well, what is the kotowaza? Kotowaza is idioms. So, what is the kotowaza? Tatami no ue ni suiren. Tatami is this. No ue, you understand, on top. Suiren is swimming, practicing to swim in water. So, you can, I am sure, very well understand what it means now. So, these tatamis, you make your floor like this. You can see how it is made, and the size of the room is measured by the number of tatamis you have in the room. You have done a kotowaza with these shoji, which is kabe ni me ari, shoji ni mimi ari. So, we have done this earlier. Now, what does this kotowaza mean? Means this is actually for all of you. Tatami no ue ni suiren. You can keep practicing to swim on the tatami. That is, keep reading about how to swim in water, what all things you have to do, how you have to use your hands and your legs. But if you actually do not go into the water, you will not be able to see whether you can swim or not. So, very interesting thing the Japanese says, you are a paper driver. So, if you do not actually drive, then it is very difficult to go on the road and think that you will be able to manage crowd easily, be able to drive in crowd easily. So, over here I want to say that please do not do this. Whatever we learn over here, whatever we do over here in class, please go practice it at home, and do not think that you know it here in your mind, because when you actually speak, then you land up fumbling, and all the grammar, all the phrases, all the expressions never come out properly. So, the more you practice, the easier it becomes. So, do not do this tatami no ue ni suiren. Do not just practice on the tatami to swim, actually go in water and try to swim over there. So, learn and practice with your partner to speak in Japanese. Do not keep it in the book and over here in your mind only. So, well, dewa minasan, kyou wa kore de owarimasu. I will keep it till here. I will finish it over here. Now, there are two kanjis which I want to do. This is of course ima, we just did. Now, there is a new kanji, owarimasu. This you know, this means ito, which is thread, kanji for thread, and this is fuyu. So, when you join the two, then it becomes owaru. So, like this 3, 4, 5 and 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So, this makes it owaru, which is to finish. Jikan we did just now, so I do not think I need to do it, and omoimasu is right here. You can practice this. So, minasan, jikan ga mairimashita node owari ni shitai to omoimasu. Soro soro owari ni shitai to omoimasu. So, now I think we should plan to finish the class. These are expressions, these are classroom expressions, or you could say when you are having a meeting and now about to finish, then you can say jikan ga mairimashita node, now it is time, soro soro owari ni shitai to omoimasu. I think I want to keep it till here, finish it over here. Now, practice at home, Don't do the kotowaza that we did just now today. Try to practice with your partner, practice loudly, do all the things that we have done, use the phrases, come prepared for your next class. We are going to do some grammar in our next class. Till then, mata aimashou. Arigatou gozaimasu.